Entitled the PGMHD, a scalable probabilistic graphical model for massive hierarchical data problem. The presenter is
Khalifeh.
Khalifeh.
Yes.
Khalifeh. Yeah.
Right. I think we need to take it off and then in. Right. Awesome. Right. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Khalifeh Al-Jada. I'm a PhD candidate in the Computer Science Department at University of Georgia. And I work as a data scientist in the search relevancy and recommendations on careerbuilder.com. And this work is actually a nice cooperation and combination between the academia and the industry efforts. PGMHD, a scalable probabilistic graphical model for massive hierarchical data, is the title of the talk. And the agenda of this talk, we're going to briefly introduce the probabilistic graphical model in general. And I thank the previous speaker because he already introduced the probabilistic graphical models somehow in his talk. So I want to spend time introducing the models. Then we're going to move to the motivation, what motivates this work. And then I'm going to present the model structure. And I promise I want to make it tough because all the math is in the paper. So I will give it, I will explain the model structure through an example to make it just not dry. And then we'll move to talk a little bit about the progressive learning technique, which we propose in this paper as well. And we're going to talk about two use cases from two different domains where we applied this model successfully. One of them is the mass spectrometry annotation, which is a very serious and tough challenge in the glycoinformatics field. And then we're going to talk about latent semantic discovery, where we applied this technique successfully to discover the latent semantic relationship between different keywords using the search logs from careerbuilder.com. And finally, we're going to conclude. So as an introduction, basically probabilistic graphical models, maybe you hear always of Bayesian network, and you hear of Markov model or Markov chain or Markov random field. So all those actually are the probabilistic graphical models. The probabilistic graphical model is composed of two parts: the graph, which represents the relationship between the random variables, and the conditional probabilities, which represent the probabilities or the calculated probabilities, conditional probabilities between the different random variables. So we have two major categories under the probabilistic graphical models. One of them is the Bayesian network, and the other one is the Markov field. So, as motivation, what motivates this work? Why we proposed a new probabilistic graphical model for massive hierarchical data? If you look to this nice tree here, colorful one, this is actually a glycan or a representation of a glycan structure. The glycan is the scientific name of the carbohydrate, and the carbohydrate itself is a chain of sugars. So what you see here is actually sugars. So the circles are a type of sugar, and then the squares are another type of sugars, and those edges between those nodes represent the connection between those sugars in the structure of the carbohydrate. So if you don't know, this glycan is actually proved to be very important for our health, because they discover basically the cancer has a strong relationship with the carbohydrate structures in our body. So that means if we, some types of glycans, some structures of glycans, if it's present in our body in a specific amount, that means there is a prediction that you're going to have cancer. But if they are not in your body, that means basically you won't have cancer. very simple. So what is important about this is to recognize the glycan structures in biological samples, what they need to do is, so they grab a biological sample, then they send it to a device called mass spectrometer. The mass spectrometer breaks the glycan structure inside the biological sample into pieces called the fragments. And then, so this level where the glycan structure exists by itself, called MS1, so usually they cannot recognize which glycan present in the biological sample by just taking the MS1. It's very difficult because sometimes they'll have hundreds or thousands of glycan structures together. So what they do, they break it into pieces, and then they break those pieces into pieces if they cannot recognize the structure by looking to those pieces as MS2, and they call this MS3. So they can keep going until MSN, until they find some pieces that say, hey, this piece belongs only to this structure, and then in this case they can recognize that the glycan structure exists in your body. So this is the problem. So how is it a problem in terms of computer science? It's a problem in terms of computer science because the scientists in this case, they receive high throughput data, millions of data points, and they have to go manually over each point and try to recognize, okay, this point represents this piece, this point represents that piece. So we try to help them by automate this process. To automate this process, machine learning is supposed to be the best technique to think of, because they can provide you with already annotated data, and you need to learn how they annotate this data, and in the future you can repeat this knowledge, use this knowledge to annotate the next data. Okay. I usually forget that I have this. So to give you some statistics, in the glycan ontology, we have 1,300 manually proved glycan structures, which means scientists said, yes, this is the right structure and it should exist in the ontology. So it's a curated database or data source. So we have 1,300 glycan structures. On the MS2 level, if we fragment those 1,300 glycan structures, we may end up with 2,979,000 possible fragments. And if you go farther, fragment the MS2 into MS3, you end up with billions of possible fragments. So this is the scale of the data which we are talking about. Okay, what would you think of as machine learning technique? Oh my goodness. Okay, those are actually circles around those. I don't know. The color doesn't work here. Anyway, the best thing to think of in this case is the Bayesian network, right? Because basically, those are like, there is dependency. This level depends on this level, and this level depends on this level. So the best thing you can think of is to build a Bayesian network, where each node in this Bayesian network represents a level of the MS. And what is the content inside each node? So the Bayesian network, we said, has two parts. The graph, which represents the dependency. So there is 3 nodes, node for the random variable MS1, node for MS2, node for MS3, and there is dependency between them. But if you look to the other side, which is the CPT, the conditional probabilistic table inside each node, the size of this table in the first node would be 1,300. But what is the size in the second node? The size in the second node would be, it would be 3 billion entries, because it's 1,300 times 3 million. So you end up with about 3 billion, a matrix of 3 billion entries in the second node, if you want to use the regular Bayesian network for that. And this is a huge sparse matrix. Barely you can see ones there. So Bayesian network in this case won't help us. So we proposed the PGMHD, Probabilistic Graphical Model for Massive Hierarchical Data. And to talk about the model structure, how we model this, probabilistic graphical model, I will explain it through an example, and all the math description and explanation of the model exists in the paper. So in terms of the same data which we talked about, we said instead of assign a node for each level as a random variable, take the outcome of each random variable and place them as nodes in your graph. And then assign a level for each random variable instead of a node for each random variable. So the level 1 in this graph here represent the MS1 random variable. And all the nodes in the level 1 represent the outcome of that level. Then if you go to the second level, we do the same. For MS2, we assign a level, and all the outcome of that level assigned nodes here. And how about those edges? So we said, okay, if this fragment in the training data provided by the users, we figure out that it was generated by this parent, this glycan. We connect them with an edge, and we do with others. So those numbers on the edges are actually the frequency, how many times we have seen when we train the model, this piece produced by this parent. So by keeping the frequencies, instead of keeping the conditional probabilities table, what we do actually is we allow the model to be a good fit for the online learning or the progressive learning later. Because whenever you receive a new data, you don't need to worry about going and update the entire CPT, which was pre-calculated. What you do basically is whenever you see a new data comes, you need to check where it fits here, and then you update only the frequency of the edge. So as a Bayesian network, if you want to think of it, the first level is the node for MS1, the second level is the node for MS2, and the third level is the node for MS3. So how we do then the probabilistic calculation? Well, we use this model actually for the auto annotation. What we did is we consider the problem as multi-class classification. So all the nodes in the first level actually represent the classes which we need at the end to recognize which of them present in this data related to. So we consider it as multi-label classification because you may end up with, you cannot usually say it is just single glycan in the sample. You have to have the ability to say it is this or that or all of them together. So it is multi-label classification problem. So what we do is, if I receive, for example, a fragment 1, fragment 3, fragment 7 as the data provided to annotate, I need now to calculate the probability of having GOG1, for example, as the classification given those data points. So basically, you can split this into probability of GOG1 given F1 times probability of GOG1 given F3, which is the normal Bayesian technique because we are talking about independency in the same level. And then how we end up calculating the probability, basically the probability for the classification, for the multi-level classification, is the frequency on the edge over the frequency of the parent. So in this case, 50 over 50 for this edge for F1. Here's 50, and the 50 for, probability, yeah, it's the frequency of the edge over the frequency of the child itself. So it is 50. And the 50, where we come up with the 50 for the F1, the frequency, it's the summation of all the n edges. So here we have only one edge of 50, so it's 50 over 50. But for the GOG1 F3, here is F3. So it is, the edge has a 20, but F3 has two edges coming, which is the total is 60, so it's 20 over 60. So that's how you calculate the probability. And how we derive this equation is actually included in the paper. The progressive learning, I have only about 3 minutes, so I have to run. Okay, so for progressive learning, basically, as I said, we have the model that accepts every time a new data set without a need to recombine all the training data together. You can integrate it with the model. And this is what we call progressive learning. So it is a very attractive in the big data era. This is how we test our model. So we have, this is what you should care about. We have 266,571 annotations in the training data. And this is how the PGMHD represented this data. We ended up with 450 nodes at the first level, which are the classes in this case. Those are going to be our classes. And the nodes, 5,983 in the second level and 200 in the third level. And this is the precision recall, which is not in the paper, unfortunately, because we did this experiment after we submit this paper, since we are now submitting this to a journal. So we compare our technique against all the well-known classifiers. And to make it a fair comparison, Weka, usually all the classifiers are in Weka. Weka give you single class classifiers, but there is an extension of Weka called MOLAN, M-U-L-A-N, where it extends all the Weka classifiers to be a multi-level classifiers. So we tested our model against all those classifiers, and this is how you can see PGMHD got a perfect precision 1 and 93% of recall. And in terms of memory in megabytes, since we are talking about scalability, PGMHD used only 43 models when we built the model from that training data set, while, for example, Bayesian network used 2.4 gigabytes. And here's the training time, the classification time. In the training time we won, in the classification time, the best was for the decision tree. And for the latent semantic discovery, since I have only last minute, this is how we represent the data from Career Builder. So the first layer represents the job title of the users, the classification of the users, the classes. And the second layer represents the search keywords which the users used in our host site. So the edges represent how many users from this class search for this keyword, and so on. And how we calculate the latent semantic by computing the probability of seeing 2 keywords given their parents. And here's the sample of the results. Hadoop, we figure out or we discover that it's related to big data, Hadoop developer, OBIE, Java, Python, and so on. And this is the conclusion, which it's just we propose a probabilistic graphical model that can scale very well with the massive hierarchical data. Questions?
Thanks. We have time for one shorter question.
Good. Even no short question.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, finally, our last speaker. I really thank everyone.